once again, we're coming to you from the offices of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, which is the umbrella group that leads American Jewry, especially relates to issues pertaining to Israel and Jews all over the world. And it's our pleasure always to be able to sit with the Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents, Malcolm Hoenlein. Malcolm, thank you again for joining us.
It's always my pleasure.
Malcolm, you just came back from Israel, where you received a unique and very special invitation to address both a special committee of the Knesset that deals with diaspora relations, and you also addressed the Israeli cabinet surrounding the anniversary of the unification of Jerusalem, the Six-Day War. So I first want to begin there, and can I ask you a personal question first? What was it like to, come in and now you're addressing the cabinet and the Knesset in two different moments? What was that like for you personally? You've done a lot of wonderful things, Malcolm. This is another one. It's very special, though.
I know by the sparkle in your eye that you get it, that it was a very special thing to come and to sit at the meeting and then to be invited to speak to the cabinet briefly about Jerusalem, which I did, and I spoke about it as a city that unites. And it unites Israel and diaspora. Jerusalem is not just Israel's business. I believe it's really the inheritance of all the Jewish people, as is the state of Israel, but unique to Jerusalem. I mean, Jerusalem is the source of our history. It's a source of our inspiration, and we pray 3 times a day directed towards Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, where the temples once stood. And in that regard, it tried to convey to them why this is a shared responsibility. I, for one, as you know, have said on this show many times that I believe when it comes to the defense and security and other issues, it's for the people of Israel to make. We have a right to have input, discuss, advise, whatever, but the ultimate decision rests with them. I think that's true of everything except Jerusalem. And there, I think everybody has an equal stake in a say. We have an equal responsibility. We don't share equal burden when it comes to the defense of Israel. We don't do it when it comes to the responsibilities, but I think we have all a vested interest that I liken it to interested shareholders when it comes to Israel per se, that gives us a right to be concerned, to be involved to the degree that any individual wants to express themselves, as long as they do it in responsible ways. But Jerusalem is unique. Mm-hmm. And it was a wonderful response from the cabinet to it.
May I ask you, again, reminisce for me. I want you to remember, where were you at the Six-Day War? What did it do for you personally? And then I also want you to talk about what you think the emotional impact of that war was, not for Israel, but for world Jewry. But first, begin with yourself. Where were you?
Okay, I wish I could say I was too young to remember.
Neither of us are.
No. I was then at the University of Pennsylvania doing my doctorate, and I worked at the Foreign Policy Institute as a Middle East specialist. And the head of the institute was a man named Robert Strauss-Hupé, who's a very well-known political scientist. And he allowed me to take off, and the university allowed me to take off for 3 months before the war. And I campaigned first to get an aid package for Israel, and to do other things in preparation. I did television programs, I toured, I spoke, I did many things, which he enabled me to do, and he opened the doors for me in Washington and many other places. I mean, I was still a young kid, and I had finished college relatively young and was finishing my doctorate at that time. And I was in Israel literally the day after the war ended.
Do you remember worrying for Israel during that period?
I worried for the 3-4 months before, because I watched the buildup. I followed it very carefully. I was in touch with people in Washington and in the Middle East. I listened day and night to what was going on. But because I was involved, it sort of helped, because you weren't just glued to the TV. I felt like I was doing something about it.
And take one moment. If there's anyone too young to remember, describe what we were hearing every day on the news and why the future of Israel seemed to hang in the balance. What were we hearing daily from the mouth of Abdul Nasser?
Oh, sure.
Just prior, the end of May, the first week of June.
Well, they closed the Straits of Tiran. They had violated the agreements. The United States had threatened, and the international community was supposed to be guaranteeing Israel's free access to these waterways. That clearly wasn't the case, and Abdel Nasser and the Syrians, Assad then, were all threatening to destroy Israel, were telling us, and had been moving troops in the Sinai, around the Sinai. King Hussein actually had been more restrained and didn't enter the war until the third day, and he had been begged by Golda and others to stay out. There was no need for them to enter. And forced by the lies and the pressure of his Arab cohorts, they entered the war and obviously lost the old city of Jerusalem and the areas that were under their control, though not recognized by any countries other than England and Pakistan, which people forget. That Israel didn't take it away from, they took it from an occupier.
No one had sovereignty of what's called the West Bank.
Since the Ottomans.
That's correct.
And so that was, the setting was one where people could not have anticipated the miraculous conflict and outcome, could never have anticipated the swiftness of Israel's victory, and the comprehensive nature, because it was really facing the Syrians when they captured the Golan. They were raining down terror on the Dan Valley and the kibbutzim that were there, and the communities that were there lived literally under hell all the time, because they controlled the heights and would just shoot down, and even snipers could kill people. You had shooting from the old city of Jerusalem onto the western Jerusalem sector, and of course from the Egyptian side there were constantly Fedayeen coming in. There were all sorts of terrorist operations, and Israel until that point, since the 56 war, didn't have an all-out war, though we had wars of attrition, etc. So people were more than concerned. I mean, people really thought that Israel's existence was on the line.
That's right.
And it was. The fact that Israel won wasn't the conclusion before the war started. And I was as I said, came there immediately after, and I went to the Mitla Pass a day or two after the war was over. They flew us over and landed actually in the Sinai to see it. And you see these rows and rows of tanks. Remember, the Russians and others had supplied endless amounts of tanks to the Egyptians and to others, and they had these huge stockpiles of armaments, most of which were just left there to rot. The Egyptian army was routed, and you would see the desert covered with boots in areas where they took off their shoes and just ran in the sand, or you would see military uniforms and helmets and the things just in abundance everywhere.
But Egyptian uniforms left behind.
Right.
Russian tanks used by the Egyptian army left behind.
Hundreds and hundreds, just in that one location. And then, but in the north, in the Golan, the Syrians fought fiercely, and there were places where Syrian soldiers were literally locked into their positions. So they had to fight to the death, and this was very costly, very difficult. They had the bunkers inside the mountains, and Israel had to fight up the mountain, and all the advantage, of course, was on the other side. But through very clever tactics and strategies and stuff, they overcame that. The Jordanians then entered, and Israel had to then open up a new front, and was very stretched, very thin. But we all know the outcome. And then in 6 days, they were able to...
Okay. And then it is this, what feels like a modern-day miracle. And there is this...
Euphoria.
Yes, euphoria, the right word. And what I want to speak now is, in essence, how the 6-day war changed not only the map of the Middle East, but how it changed Jewish self-perception, and how we have never been the same. For many people, Malcolm, it was not until the 6-day war that they woke up to the fact that there was an Israel. And even in the former Soviet Union, it was the 6-day war which seemed to awaken the refuseniks movement and this resurgence of Jewish identity. The 6-day war was, and I get goosebumps even talking to you about it, a watershed moment in modern Jewish history. And so I want to hear it from, Malcolm Hoenlein's perspective.
Well, first of all, you've used the exact words I would have used. It was a watershed period. It was a transforming period in the identity of Jews, in the identity of Israel. Israel standing in the world, skyrocketed. The whole world was centered around Israel, people marveling at this unbelievable achievement. Many countries, I think, were already writing the obituaries for Israel. There was talk about evacuating the Jewish population and how they would divide them up, and the Arabs, who are capable. I remember in college doing a study about cognitive dissonance, which is something that the Arabs don't have in the same way we do, that Western minds and Eastern minds operate differently, and that is being able to accept two contrary facts at the same time. The late Professor Arkabi once told me that it's like looking at the arabesque design, with the interwoven lines. He said that's how they are able to accept, and they see things where we might look in straight lines at things and say this and this can't exist at the same time. That's why they could accept at the one time that Egypt was winning the war, and knowing that there wasn't a single Egyptian plane in the air anymore. And all the communications they heard were in Hebrew. So it really, and I tell you, to sense, I don't want them to live through a war, but to have, for this generation, to have missed that experience, that unique moment, to have lived through the euphoria, the exuberance, the miracle, there was a religious awakening, there was a spiritual awakening. This wasn't a military victory, this was a moral victory. Everybody understood this was a war to destroy the Jewish state and to destroy the Jews living in the state. And they didn't succeed. There were times when people thought they would succeed, but they did not. And you had these overwhelming odds against it when you're fighting on one front, two fronts, three fronts, and yet being able to overcome it. And the Iraqi brigades that were stationed in Jordan, moving down, the Jordan Legion, which was trained by the British, were well armed, very sophisticated fighters, which was a whole new dimension to what Israel had to encounter. And its impact, I remember, on young people, its impact on older people, and perhaps it was the shifting point from the Shoah. That, the Shoah had dominated this whole period and all of our thinking. And now here, Jews once again were redeemed. The Jews emerged victorious. The Jews came out of the ashes and the darkness of the Holocaust. And with the creation of the state, it was the first stage, but this was now the culmination of that stage. And Israel also entered a new stage thereafter.
It's interesting, for me, it was as if the perception of the Jew in the consciousness of the average American Jew changed. And it's not in any way to argue.
But not only Jews, but Israelis. Sometimes they
yes,
couldn't make
right.
the linkage.
Yes,
so
you're
they
right.
talked about Israelis in exuberant terms, but didn't necessarily make the linkage to talking about Jews in those same terms.
Well, I think many American Jews, as you say, it was the antithesis to the popular notion. It's an unfair notion, but to the popular notion that the Jew somehow was meek and docile and did not have strength.
I agree completely.
And all of a sudden, the image is no longer the older Jew who is forced into a concentration camp. It becomes now this young, gorgeous, strong, brave, courageous Israeli soldier, man and woman. I mean, one of the pictures of this, and it was on the cover of one of the most famous books done after the Six-Day War, was of this gorgeous woman, Israeli soldier, epitomizing now what it meant to be not simply an Israeli, but a Jew. And it seemed that for many American Jews, there was a different sense of pride, of strength. You stood differently after Israel made its sacrifice in the Six-Day War.
I think you're 100% right. I think that is an apt description of it. And you mentioned earlier the impact, and where it's perhaps best defined is what it did to Russian Jews. Russian Jews who've been subjugated for 70 years or 60 years at that time, who had very little access to Jewish education. Whatever they did alone. This was a volcano. It erupted and flowed throughout the country. It touched people in little cities. And for many of them, and remember the Russians were close allies of the Arabs, and many believe, in some of the new history books, in fact, recount that they put the onus on the Russians for having instigated and given these reports about how bad things were and what was happening, really to bring the war about for their own purposes. And here they had made this investment of billions of dollars, and American weapons were proving superior. The Russian weapons were embarrassed, let's say, and proved ineffective. In Russia itself, the young people and older people would say that they, as they read these accounts, here they were told that Israel's a mosquito-ridden area. All the stories about Israel were censored and negative, and they're being told about this vicious Israeli army that is defeating all these guys and winning all these wars, and the people are going crazy and saying, "My God, now we know the truth." And the tremendous, I mean, it's almost undefinable, the impact that this had in awakening Russian Jews, awakening Jews everywhere, but particularly Russian Jews. That's why this year they marked in the 40th anniversary of the Soviet Jewry movement, though it began much earlier.
Yes.
But this was the critical watershed, I think, in this period of the effort.
Now, there's one more dimension to speak to you about, and we should let our viewers know. And this is a very lovely honor, both for Malcolm Hoenlein and for the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. The Mayor of Jerusalem has told you that both you personally and the conference, for all the work it's done, is being awarded the Ne'eman Yerushalayim Award, a faithful, loyal servant and helper and guardian of Jerusalem. And first, I congratulate you and the conference. It is well deserved, and we who have watched what the conference does and what you've been doing for many, many years know how well deserved it is. But it speaks to the other dimension here. An emotional capital of the Jewish people became now a reality in a more concrete way, because in essence, as you say, once Jordan entered the war, it led to our coming back, not only to the old city, but to the Western Wall. And we've all seen that, again, that now wonderful photograph of the Israeli soldiers first coming to the wall, and then the shofar is blown for the first time, certainly since the War of Independence, at the Western Wall. And people don't realize it was no wonderful esplanade. The Jordanians had not taken care of anything that was Jewish, and the Western Wall was basically in an alley. But speak now for a moment about what you believe the significance is of Jerusalem. What was it like? You were there. What was it like for you when all of a sudden Jerusalem is, quote, liberated and in fact united?
Well, I must say that it had a very special significance for me, beyond all the excitement and the declaration by Yadin that Har HaBayit B'Yodenu, that the Temple Mount is in our hands.
It's in ours.
The scene of the three coming there, the soldiers coming to pray, and I met the doctor, the blonde in the middle, just a couple of weeks ago during a speech in Toronto. He was a special guest at this event where I spoke, and met all three in Jerusalem because they were invited to one of the ceremonies as well. I had been there in 1966, a year before the Six-Day War. I visited a number of Arab countries because of my capacity at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, and I visited the Kotel, and obviously it was a time when very few Jews or no Jews were officially allowed to come, and well, having the name Malcolm Hoenlein at that time was an advantage because it didn't give away any ethnicity per se, and I had more hair and it was blonder, so it was also a good decoy. But the experience of being there and having to clandestinely get to the Kotel, and when I came there, it was a rather narrow area, and they urinated dump garbage there. It was truly horrific to see it, and I actually started to try and clean it up a little bit, and a policeman came, so I had to put everything in my pocket that I had tried to clean up, and tried to pass as just another tourist looking at the old the streets of the old city, and then to come back a year later and see a free Jerusalem. When I came back through the Mandelbaum Gate, which connected the old city and the new city of Jerusalem, the Jordanian and Israeli sectors, when I rounded the bend, the Israeli soldier looked at me and he said, "I think I can say welcome home." And I got down and I kissed the land as I walked across, because I had been put under house arrest in Jerusalem, in the eastern side by the Jordanians, for just seeing something I shouldn't have seen. So to come back then a year later and to be able to walk freely, to see the plaza then open in front of us as they, cleared the area and made it available to the masses who were coming, to see the respect that it gave Jews all over the world, and the identification of so many good people, Christians of every faith and people of every faith, blacks, whites, yellows, everybody, identifying with Israel. And then coming to Israel to see and to be part of this miracle. It was so palatable. It was something that pervaded everything. You slept it, you drank it, you ate it, you lived it these days. And for months and months afterwards, because every day, we began to realize the true scope of the victory and of the miracle that we were privileged to see. The truth is that we have those miracles now. We just take them for granted. They don't have to be as blatant as a 6-day war. Every day of Israel's existence is a miracle. When you think of what's up against, that you have Hezbollah with 14,000 rockets, you have 2,000 Qassems fired, and unfortunately, people killed in the south. But you look at the array of enemies against Israel. We see what the powerful United States faces in Iraq. Israel faced 20 Iraqs at the same time, and yet not only survived but thrived and is able to develop this high-tech industry, which is a miracle. Look at all its neighbors. It has a higher per capita income than Saudi Arabia without the oil, because of the miracle of Israel. And we have to make sure that there are these things to not to take the miracles for granted. God is giving us signs every day with the new discoveries in Israel. When I was there, I went to visit the city of David, and I went to the tunnels, and you look at the things every day. They're making new discoveries which bring the Bible to life, which reaffirm the Jewish claim to Jerusalem, which give, in the bedrock of mountains, it's indisputable, it's irrefutable, the connection. They found a coin in the rubble that Arafat had destroyed on the Temple Mount that is now being gone through, and it's the first time, it was a coin from the first temple period with the name Elijah on it. They found the signet ring with the name of Yochai ben Shlemiyahu, who was the minister sent by King Tzidkiyahu to put the prophet Jeremiah in jail, 100 meters from where the actual Jewry was kept, this pit. And so many things. They dig a light railroad, and every time the shovel goes into the ground, it uncovers another part of Jewish history. It's a sign, it's a reminder to us. Don't take it for granted. Don't think that the 6-day war is not history. It's a living experience that should be communicated to our young, not just the challenges and the tsaras, but the victory, the celebration. And it's one that all people should share in, because it's really an inspiration to mankind, to humankind, to men and women around the world to understand what the human spirit can accomplish, and that there's no odds you can't overcome if you have an honest motivation, if you're driven by good, and if you can overcome all the terrorists and all the evil in our world if we are united, if we are motivated, if we understand, if we have principles that guide us, and we stay committed to the truth and to the inspiration that guided us.
Oh, that was beautiful. You know what? I don't even want to go to problems right now. We're in a celebration mode, both for the anniversary of the 6-day war and more so for the unification of Jerusalem, liberation, and then basically what it has become. The next time we sit together, I'll ask you to deal with some of the political issues that are raised. Again, on behalf of everyone who understands what you and the Conference of Presidents has done, I again applaud you. Mazal Tov on the Ne'eman Yerushalayim Award. It is always wonderful to hear not only your insight, but to share your passion. And I hope people have heard you today, and that there will be, throughout the Jewish world, certainly throughout American Jewish life, an appreciation for what human beings, Jews on the front line who live in Israel, these are Israeli people who they gave of themselves so that there is now a brighter, lovelier Israel for all of us. And Jerusalem is symbolic, and as you expressed so eloquently, in some way it is our city. It is a city that speaks to all mankind, but it is the city of King David and of the Jewish people, and it is one I hope all of our viewers get a chance to see in the near future. Malcolm Hoenlein, thank you as always so much for spending time with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Malcolm Hoenlein, Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.